as the need to produce more with reduced cost is more important than ever. It's time to think proactive intervention. With our complete portfolio, expanded operating envelopes, and leading digital capabilities, you can perform interventions in any condition for better results. We are Intervention Reinvented.
Hi, and welcome to SPE Live today and our today's broadcast, Proactive Intervention. Joining me shortly is William Antonio and Matthew Billingham from Schlumberger. With the recent volatile oil prices and following massive CAPEX squeeze, intervention is even more important than ever to address declining production, rejuvenate wells, and maximize recovery and asset value. Intervention enables more production at reduced cost per barrel. Currently, around 70% of intervention is done on reactive workflows to restore production. We are going to be discussing how we can proactively plan reservoir and well maintenance, reduce risk and improve efficiency to optimize production, leveraging technologies and current digital advancements. My name is Nils Kaageson-Loe. It's my pleasure to be your host today. If you're new to SPE Live, well, find us on hashtag SPE Live or find us also on SPE.org. We've had a packed week with informative SPE Lives focused around the theme of well intervention as we lead up to the SPE ICoTA Virtual Well Intervention Conference being held next week. So tomorrow we have our last SPE Live on the theme. So we're again talking to Schlumberger about transforming stimulation through intervention. You can find all of this week's content and also more content on SPE Live if you just go and search on hashtag SPE Live or search also on SPE.org. A lot of really good content, all for you to view at your leisure, also for free. So please make use of that resource. It's really good. Now, let's meet our guests for today. First of all, William Antonio, Business Line Director, Reservoir Performance Intervention, Schlumberger. William is based in Paris and is responsible for the product portfolio management, market intelligence, technology development, and technology delivery for all of the Schlumberger intervention services, which include perforating, both wireline and TCP, surface well testing and multi-phase flow meters, wireline production logging, and mechanical intervention services, including slickline, E-line, tractor, and powered intervention and coiled tubing. A big portfolio. Joining him is Matthew Billingham, Technical Director, Reservoir Performance Intervention at Schlumberger. Matthew is also based in Paris and is responsible for technical guidance on all aspects of intervention services for the purposes of service delivery, technology development, and development of intervention techniques. William, Matthew, welcome to SPE Live. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much, Nils. My pleasure.
Yes. Thank you, Nils.
So we are going to be talking about proactive intervention, and with this, an ever more critical strategy for the industry. And just a reminder to our audience, I'm sure you guys out there are eager to share your views on intervention. Is reactive better than proactive? Is proactive a thing even? Do we know enough about given reservoir or well performance or well properties to really have a truly proactive engagement and strategy? So please share your comments. You can share it all through the chat box here on SPE Live. So let's kick us off, I guess. So really, capital discipline has changed and increased focus on cash flow. What can operators do about it in this current environment, and where can they go next?
Well, thank you very much, Nils. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the audience. I think we have a very good attendance all over the world. So let's start the discussion. I think it's a very interesting question, Nils, because the oil industry has been going through a very dynamic and hectic decade. I will say the last 10 years has been quite I would say it has been very volatile. I think we're seeing a slide now that is showing a little bit on the budget, both on the CAPEX and OPEX side, that the oil and gas industry in the upstream sector has been seeing in the last almost 8 years, and a projection until 2025. So let's keep in mind, let's look at the two previous downturns. If you look at the 2014-15 downturn, we saw the CAPEX being cut by almost 30%, while the OPEX was cut around 10%. Now, in the most recent downturn caused by the COVID pandemic in 2020, we saw again the CAPEX being cut by almost 28%, while the OPEX was just cut 7%, right? So it's an interesting thing. When we see the blue bar, which is the OPEX, we see how the OPEX has been relatively stable and resilient across the last decade. And we expect the OPEX to continue growing. On the other side, we see the CAPEX, which is every time there is a cycle, this is where the oil and gas companies, we automatically cut the bulk, cut the cash. And this trend, I would say, is about to change. I think we're starting a new era in the industry. We're seeing investors really scrutinizing and pushing for cash discipline. And obviously, many of the oil and gas companies are divesting, or not divesting, I would say, diversifying their investment and investing more in new energies. By doing that, it means that there is going to be a lot of pressure on maximizing the production from existing assets. And that's why we see the OPEX growing, I would say, at a faster pace than the CAPEX. And that's why intervention is going to be more important than ever, because the interventions will allow any oil and gas company to bring fast barrels at low cost if it's done in the right way. And I think that's going to be part of the discussions we're going to be having today. And more importantly as well, at a low carbon footprint. I think sustainability is on the agenda of any corporation on any sector, not only the oil and gas. And I think in the past we were just looking at cost. Now we're also be looking at how we can just do this in a sustainable way. When we look at the entire number of active wells in the world, we see that there is around 1.8 million active wells today, and around 30% of these wells require some sort of intervention. So when we look at what the industry is going to need going forward to satisfy the demand, today the demand is around 92, 93 million barrels per day. We expect that by the end of this year, we're going to reach hopefully back to the pre-COVID levels of 98, 99 million barrels a day. And going forward, the way to be able to deliver this production is going to be through, obviously, some drilling activity that is going to come back in this year, but also we're going to need as well to focus a lot on production and intervention. Okay.
Thanks for that, William. So obviously cash discipline, very critical, maximizing asset value, very critical. So I guess what everyone wants to know is how much more production can be recovered from their existing wells? Is there data to indicate how much operators can retrieve?
Yeah, there is some very interesting data. In fact, the UK sector has actually pioneered. Now, we don't have global benchmarking as such, but I'm going to go through some of the data that we have from the North Sea, and I think it's a very good set of data that can be applied analogously globally, because we're looking at brownfield mature assets that typically have been there for a while and therefore have a mature supply chain available in that region. So when we look at data that's been collected in the recent years, some excellent work was started by the Well Intervention Excellence Network, which was a group of about 22 operators who collated intervention data and started to do some benchmarking. And what they were able to determine from the research that they did, that on average, clients that focused on intervention could increase their production rates by about 10%. There was some variation within that. For instance, on land interventions, it was about 9%, but on dry tree platforms, it was actually as high as 16%. And this was benchmarked in an SPE paper, which is referenced at the bottom of the slide. Probably the reason that there was that 16% on the dry tree platforms is these are expensive assets and therefore got a little bit more focus than, say, for instance, some of the land wells. But it just shows that, 16% is absolutely achievable. And just to put that into perspective, we take that 10%. If you're a producer producing about 100,000 barrels a day, $50 oil, and we know that that obviously cycles, but for an operator, that's $500,000 in cash flow each day. So there's huge value in this, for especially if you're not drilling because your CAPEX is constrained, just as William explained. So then how do what is the value of that? So again, from some of the data that's been put together by the Oil and Gas Authority in the UK, and you can download their 2018 Well Insight report, it basically showed that the cost of this production about £285 million was spent on interventions, and about 43.5 million barrels of oil equivalent were safeguarded, restored, and there was some optimization within there. And when you do the math, that basically comes in about £6.5 per barrel, or $9 per barrel. So it is coming in at a very significant. So I mean, even when we looked when we had oil earlier in the year down 20, 30 minutes lower, there's still good value in this. And what's fascinating within that data set is 14% of subsea wells, and these are the challenging ones, these are expensive ones to intervene in, although there is a huge need to do it, but that was actually 54% of the cost. So you can see the value proposition gets even better. We're on those dry tree platforms. So how did the people who achieved 10% go and do it? It's been benchmarked in one particular survey, and what it showed was that those that intervened in about 1 out of 3 wells annually and were comfortable with an array of intervention techniques, and we're hitting that 10%, maybe that 16% on the dry trees. Those that had a much lower performance really were only intervening in 1 out of 15 wells, and probably only had 1 or 2 intervention techniques that they felt comfortable with. And of course, this makes sense. I mean, intervention is a wide array of problems. We've got well integrity problems, we've got reservoir induced production, etc. So you need a portfolio of solutions to go and address all those different issues. You need to be comfortable with them. That's why knowledge sharing is so important, why strong domains are important. And one might argue, it's very interesting that you saw that basically, even in this UK data, there was only about a 14% intervention rate. And it varied hugely. Some were doing 0 intervention, some were up to 30%. But whatever, you've got to be gathering surveillance data early to identify issues, get in there early and get the proactive interventions done, the maintenance work as such.
Thanks, Matthew. So some very compelling numbers there and some good compelling reasons for doing interventions. But, some of that, I guess, is what you were talking about was reactive interventions. So why should we, I mean, maybe it's an obvious question, but why should we shift to proactive interventions?
Okay, so let me answer this. So I think, as Matt explained, the numbers that we saw in the previous slide and what Matt just told us, I mean, there shouldn't be any reason why the operators are not doing more interventions, right? It makes good sense. $8 per barrel, it will be perfect sense to go and do more interventions. But the reality is that today we're seeing that first of all, there are 2 main challenges in the intervention sector. First is that the OPEX that we discussed in the beginning of our conversation, the OPEX has been spent mainly on reactive activities. It means that when there is an issue with a well, either it's a well integrity issue, either we have sanding, or either we have an artificial lift pump failure, we just go and intervene the well to restore the production, right? So basically, it's not giving me intervention, is not giving to the customers additional barrels, but it's just restoring the production that somehow got affected. You see, these are some statistics as well we got from some papers and some data market research, where it's showing that 70% of the entire budget is being done on this reactive approach, while only 30% is really trying to increase recovery or increase the benchmark of the production of certain field. So this is one important point. That's why moving into a proactive approach will help the industry to deliver extra barrels at lower cost on the intervention approach. Another, I would say, challenge that we're facing today is that there is, I would say, a misperception that interventions might be too expensive, or doing infill drilling might be even cheaper, especially when you consider that some of the commodity prices in terms of the drilling rigs or the drilling services have dropped significantly. And some people will say, it's cheaper just to do an infill drilling campaign rather than just go and intervene a well. And that's why it's important to understand that when we talk about intervention, we're talking about heavy intervention, which involves a drilling rig or a workover, hydraulic workover units. We can have a light well intervention as well, or you can have a rigless intervention. So within the total cost per barrel for an intervention, there are so many variabilities, and that's why we want to really make sure that we have a good positioning and offering and understanding of the different options to address these challenges. Now, on the right-hand side of this slide, we also see another big challenge, which is the performance, right? So I think there is a big misalignment between the operator's objective and, I would say, the way that the commercial models and the contract for service companies are done. So this is a very interesting data point that says that 35% of the interventions, at least on this study, didn't achieve the main objective of that program, of that campaign. And usually this objective is about production. So imagine for a moment that you have 35% of your wells that you drill that don't land in the target zone, or 35% of your cement jobs don't have a successful cementing job. So this is obviously not acceptable in the current industry standards. However, on the intervention side, I think I would say the industry hasn't been pushing too much for efficiency. And I think there is also a misalignment between what the operators need and also the commercial models and the solutions. So I think the main issue is the lack of predictability, right? So when you do an intervention, there are so many things that can go wrong or different than planned. And that's why we need to start changing the way that we plan and we design the intervention, right? To me, digital plays a very, very important factor. I would say in the last decade, the oil and gas industry has invested tremendously in terms of modernizing and doing a full digital transformation on the subsurface elements and on the drilling activities. However, when we go to the interventions and production space, our estimation is that for every dollar spent on digital projects, only 10 cents go to intervention. It means that we are really behind the envelope. We need to really push further, and the value that digital can bring to interventions to improve the efficiency and the performance of any intervention is quite dramatic. I think that's a very important point. The other angle is in terms of when we talk about proactive interventions, it means about leveraging the domain knowledge that, the experience. We've been intervening wells for over 100 years. And then we have absolutely a huge database of results, different techniques, different methods, different technologies. But somehow we're still using, copy-paste every time we are going to do an intervention. Many times we just continue doing the same recipe to intervene a well, to do a cleanup, to do a perforating job. And absolutely, there are so many things we can modernize. And I would say this is one of the key industry shifts we're trying to push, which is how we can just absolutely blend the domain expertise, the digital tools, and the, I would say, the worldwide expertise and database that we have, how we can just make this to make it a more proactive approach on the intervention.
So thank you, William. So again, really following on from what Matthew was saying with those compelling numbers. So, giving good reason as to why we be more proactive, a significant strategic step change for some operating companies. And you mentioned their value of digital and the aggregation of data to actually facilitate some of this intervention proactivity. Also, aggregation of services. So, for the operators out there, what does Schlumberger do to address those challenges that you sort of highlighted there?
No, thanks, Neil. So I will say in the last year, Schlumberger went through the biggest reorganization that we've been in our history. And the main intention was to simplify the interfaces that we have with our customers. So in the intervention and production space, the main, I would say, touch points with the customer organizations, we usually talk with completion engineers, we talk with workover engineers, with production engineers. And when you think about the workflows that these personas have to do to plan an intervention or deliver the production for that specific field or asset, they have to reach out to so many vendors. They need to reach out in the past to a slickline company, or to a wireline company, or to a company that provides plugs, or to a coiled tubing company. And it was a little bit cumbersome. There were so many touch points. So what we have done, we have combined all the different technologies and conveyances that we have in Schlumberger, and we have put this into one single team, one single management team, and one single sales, I would say, focal point. So by doing this, we want to really start thinking about what is the customer challenge and how we can just provide a solution through interventions, rather than just providing a discrete services on E-line or slick line or coiled tubing. So I think this is a very powerful shift. It's the first time we stopped talking about wireline or well services. Now we're talking about intervention as a holistic solution for the customer. And as I said before, digital is the key game changer. By having digital, we're going to be able to really take to the next level the technologies that we already have. And by bringing automation, this is, I would say, a very important point. I'm very glad to share. I think you have seen many posts in LinkedIn and in the media that now we are able to do autonomous wireline operations with no human interaction whatsoever. And this is just the future of where the intervention sector is going to go through. I also want to highlight that we cannot disconnect a well intervention from what is happening in the surface, right? So within our intervention portfolio, we're also including our testing solutions, our surface and production solutions that can help customers to handle issues with such as water handling, production, debottlenecking, well testing for sure, multi-phase flow meter. So these are connecting the subsurface, connecting the well intervention and the surface, all within one umbrella. Matt, do you want to add any comments?
Yes, I'd love to add to that. I think that's a great summary and overview. Coming from the domain perspective, because that's my role, the technical domain within Schlumberger. I mean, I was very lucky in the field to have been able to do slickline, wireline, coiled tubing, and testing in the field. And, you know, for me, I always, you know, when we went and did operations, forgive me, you know, would always be the discussion. That sounds a bit funny, but, you know, we're doing this job. When's the payback going to be? And as a young engineer, I was always quite impressed, you know, how quick the payback was. And then I wondered, why weren't we doing more interventions? And I think William's thrown up a number of those challenges there, and we've discussed the case for doing interventions. But for me, as a domain person who's got experience in all those different, if we should say, legacy product lines, it was always sort of the dream to have everything come together, to be able to offer the holistic solutions. We talked earlier about the wide range of challenging problems that clients can have. As interventionists, we are problem solvers, and sometimes before the problem even occurs, we want to be out there gathering the clues. That's the surveillance side. So to be able to bring this portfolio together has been absolutely fantastic. And now working with one domain team where we are looking across all of these various solutions and really being able to align to the client's needs and get the outcomes driven in a much better direction by holistically looking at the solutions. But also this is an area where there's been a lot of innovation. Although we say there hasn't been the same investment that we've seen in other areas, there has been innovation. And a key element of that has been addressing that 35% rate with regards to not meeting the technical objectives. We had lots of tools or efficiency rates were 99%, but you know, the industry as a whole has not necessarily given the clients results. So a lot of enriching the way that we do operations by bringing downhole data to surface. We have for far too long relied on surface pumping rates, surface tensions, etc., to infer what's happening downhole, and we're not going to change our success rate if we just rely on that. So a lot of technologies today are bringing data to surface. So slickline, a few years ago, no one would have ever thought that we could do virtually most of the electric line operations that we can through a slickline, that small, light, lean footprint. But with the advent of digital slickline, we're getting that. Also, with regards to the likes of powered intervention, you know, again, about 10 years ago, we wouldn't have thought that we'd be milling on wireline. And what we're seeing actually is where we would have said historically were issues. You can't mill on wireline because you don't have circulation. Well, it means we've had to approach it from a different way, and actually we're milling without putting fluids in the well. Now we have to pick the right application. You know, we're not going to go and do lots of frac plugs today with milling on wireline. That's still going to be coiled tubing, but be able to pick and select from those technologies is key. And coiled tubing has also evolved enormously. You know, coiled tubing now is enabled by fiber. So the whole of the coiled tubing becomes an instrument as such. We get distributed sensing along the entire wellbore. But the latest evolution of that is then to basically deliver power along that fiber pathway, and now we're eliminating batteries, etc. So we're getting to smaller BHAs, which gives us better flexibility, quicker operations to rig up, etc. So there's a lot of innovation going on, a lot of instrumentation, which dives into this automation. Everything that we instrument enables us to automate. And as William said, you know, we ran our very first fully automated unit where no one was interacting it from when it ran in from surface to finish the job and pulled out a hole. That was completely automated and running on AI algorithms. Also, to have within this portfolio now the full stimulation, the flowback domain, these are so complementary to what we're doing in our intervention services. And to have, as I said earlier, to bring all the domain experts together, so to make sure that we make the maximization out of that portfolio. So I think that sums up from a domain perspective why we're so excited by this reorganization and putting together the intervention solutions that we can.
Okay. So that is, again, a very attractive customer-facing strategy that Schlumberger has developed here, and obviously address a lot of these perceived demands from the industry. So I had a very good question here from the audience. It was from Marcos Lorenzoni Dominguez. So addressing the question around, you mentioned digitization and digital technology. So he's asking, what do you mean by digital? All the data is digital. I mean, industry's been faced with siloed data for a while. It's been an ongoing question within the industry. So what's your response to that? Is everything digital, or is this still a challenge?
I think it's an excellent question, Nils. Thanks for that. So you're absolutely right. Every time we take a downhole measurement, it's data, so you can argue that's digital. But the challenge that we have in intervention is that up to 65% of the activities that we do today do not acquire any downhole information, and it's just pure mechanical brute force. We're doing a slick line job, we're retrieving a gas lift valve, or we're doing a coiled tubing clean out job. Basically, we're not really capturing any data, any insights on what is happening downhole and how I can optimize the intervention and how we can just make this job faster or cheaper or more effective, right? So the digital component is, I would say, it's about making our intervention more intelligent. That's one part. As Matt explained, if you can absolutely know what is happening downhole, you can take real-time decisions. For example, you're doing a coiled tubing simulation job. By having our active technology, you can absolutely know when to stop pumping, when you can absolutely stop the operation, which is something that in the past we were perhaps just following the traditional practice of pumping for 12 or 24 hours. So by bringing insights to the intervention, you can absolutely leverage digital. Also on the efficiency front, as I explained before, the automation is all about power by digital. That's a very good enabler and a very good way to explain how digital can make our operations safer. So we're going to be able to have consistent operations. We're going to be able to avoid breaking cables or slick lines because of human errors. So that's an element that digital really brings to the equation. And from this is what we call the operations performance, right? How digital can help us to make our operations more efficient. Now, when we look at the customer asset performance, digital is absolutely a key enabler to link the subsurface, the reservoir model, the production model, with the planning of the intervention. So that's a very, very important aspect of digital, where we can absolutely plan interventions by leveraging, for example, the worldwide data repository we have in the 20,000 plus interventions we do every year. We know what was the plan, what was the outcome, and we can know what is the percentage of success by every intervention. So this is a very important point. Also, we can help customers to optimize the way that they basically plan or choose the method and the best technique and technology for certain intervention. And we can just do all this powered by digital and machine learning. So I would say digital on the planning stage is also quite important. Matt, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you've given a really good summary there of the fact that, really when we look at intervention as a whole, as mentioned earlier, we've relied far too much on just surface data. And yes, everything that we've got at surface maybe can be digitized and we're recording it, but really, are we using it properly? Are we using data from downhole? So I think that's where we're getting a lot of change. And as you said, in the pre-job planning and setting up of the programs, etc., superb opportunities there.
Thanks, guys. So really, that brings me to my next question. It's a great question from the audience also. Because you've been talking about intelligent interventions. So how is technology then really contributing to de-risking interventions?
Okay, thank you, Nils. So I think it's linked to the previous question that if technology can allow us to de-risk interventions, and if we can ensure to the operators that they can have what or predict what is going to be the outcome of an intervention by choosing the right well, by choosing the right method, right, and by having the right contingency plans, then absolutely this is how we can help through digital and through technology to improve the performance and the outcome. At the end of the day, the whole thing about interventions, we want to really bring the best barrel at the lowest cost. So I think this is why this is so important, right? I will also bring perhaps an example on autonomous milling, right? So maybe, I don't know if we can just put the slide we have on the autonomous milling, but this is a big shift from the way that we were doing operations. In the past, every time we need to mill, let's say, a ball valve, we need to have, either with cold tubing or even a full workover to do the milling. And today we're able, through our Resolve IX platform, we can really understand what is happening downhole. We can absolutely measure what is the weight on beat. We can actually optimize the whole milling sequence, and we can reduce the time and do this in a rigless or light intervention fashion instead versus a heavy intervention. So this is just a very simple example on how technology and automation is transforming the way that we do it. We have been able to cut intervention programs by weeks in many occasions. And imagine when you're doing an intervention in a deep water rig, this brings a lot of value to our customers.
And what's a really important aspect on this one, the milling is a very good example, is the, our initial approach to milling. There was some techniques of trying to manage weight on bit through cable. We knew straight away that wasn't really going to be an option for us. So we went with surface control. But what we very quickly learnt was that the latency just was too great. You've got an operator at surface who's basically trying to monitor the operation. And yes, they can do a pretty good job of optimizing it. But what we found is by instrumenting the equipment downhole properly and having the correct steady state control systems states down there, we could then start to do this automation downhole, and we're responding within milliseconds. And what that meant was that basically we were eliminating stalling events massively, by about 50%. So when we even did some SITs trying to cut through some things, we just gave up because the progress wasn't there. As soon as we went on to this mill optimizer type technique, it was just going through so much better. And that showed, that how you can vastly improve with the downhole automation, that aspect there. I think I'd like to go back to the risk as well, because that was one of the questions that came up earlier, and how we minimize risk, because I think there's an important mindset that we have to address here, that maybe there's a lot of asset managers and production technologists who maybe are concerned that we're also intervening in a live well. You're giving us that promise maybe of 10%, but I've still got my base production that I want to be concerned about going in with a live well. And, in the last years, there's been a lot to be done to address those risks. Sometimes as a service company, because we're going into live wells every day, we maybe don't understand the risk as a client sees it from their perspective quite so much. But cable technology has come along hugely with regards to encapsulated polymer lock cables, which means we can get much more pull down hole, means the tractors have to pull less. We've got far better with regards to tool planning software, so we can understand the flow regimes that we're going into, how the tools are going to behave, how we do the power management, etc. And in the worst case scenario as well, we've developed the tools that, before we relied on mechanical weak points and shear subs and things like that. Now we've got on-demand electrically released devices that can even be programmed if there's a problem with the telemetry to release. So we can leave clean fishing profiles and get in there and fish with a very high rate of recovery. And it's enabled things like slickline light well interventions. That was always a concern because you'd have no weak point in the slickline system, whereas today, now we can put digitally controlled release devices. So these are all the types of ways that we've got to look at risk, eliminate risk, to ensure that customers are happy for us to be intervening in their live wells.
So very exciting technology, compelling business case behind it. So I guess, how can service companies align with customers' objectives to improve production? That's a big step, right? That'd be a big ask.
No, absolutely, Nils. I think this is the key, right? On the well construction side and drilling side, we have seen how customers have really changed the way that they hire services, by having some outcome-based contracts. And by doing this, we have seen a big improvement on the drilling efficiency, right? I'm very glad to see that on the intervention side, we have also seen the same trend. I think we're seeing now one example of this is a case study that just finished a few months ago in the North Sea, where we managed to basically incorporate all the elements we've been discussing in the last half an hour. From proactive planning, we were able as well to help customers on choosing from a cluster of wells, which were the wells that will have the highest chance of success, and obviously to maximize production. The customer, by the way, they have a challenge on the budget they have, so we were able to together, I would say, put a skin on the game, work together with the domain expertise that we have, choose the best method. We were also able to put a very comprehensive technology basket for that intervention campaign. And more important, we developed an outcome-based commercial model where the service company's success was the operator's success. So I would say this is a very good example on how you can absolutely transform the intervention space and move from reactive to proactive and align the objectives from service companies and operators with the ultimate goal of reducing the total cost per barrel, and obviously do this in a most effective and safe way.
So I want to bring in one more question here. So we've been talking about proactive intervention, and we had a really great question from Ahmed. Ahmed. Every single well intervention methods are different, so that sort of speaks to the reactive piece. So what do you say to that? I mean, obviously the strategy you're promoting is very compelling. So, you know, this is going to be a customer question. So what do you say to that?
I think if I can start to answer that one, and then I'll hand to William. Yes, absolutely. I think the point there, every single well and every I mean, there are commonalities. We do know, you know, there's certain challenges. For instance, you know, one of the biggest challenges we know today from data that we've got benchmarking is, you know, tubular deposits, scale corrosion, etc. We do know the big picture, but when it comes down to the well level and intervening, I mean, we can open the swab valve, we can start running in hole, and we can encounter something different to we expected. I think that's part of the power of having that portfolio altogether, being aligned. I think William mentioned in the previous discussion, you know, when you've got those aligned outcomes as well, having the right basket out there to do the operation at the well site, offshore, wherever it is. Historically, would have gone with, you know, items called out by the line item, but be buying aligned, having the contingencies there, so we can handle this variability and be efficient at doing it. I mean, efficiency is very important when it comes to realizing the value within interventions. So being able to respond to something different real time. I think domain's also very important, and to accept that, yes, you know, interventions can be challenging. And I would actually state a lot of the workflows that many operators have been working with have been maybe more aligned to the CAPEX driven workflows and drilling. Now there's a realization that with the pressures we're under today, interventions as a means of sustaining cash flow by basically optimizing and bringing in the production through that means. But there has to be an acknowledgement that needs to be a collaborative environment so that we can address the potential problems, pick the best technique, have the contingencies ready to go as necessary, and to an extent be humble that, you know, these challenges can be significant. There can be a wide variance, but we do have within the industry as a whole a fantastic portfolio of tools to go and address these. William,
yeah, I know. So to complement on Ahmed's question, I think he was also asking how we can just, because every well is different, how we can use the lesson learned from one well and apply to another. And that's a fantastic question, and this is where digital absolutely brings the whole value. As you are very correct, there are so many different, I would say, environments in terms of, you know, well depth, formation type, casing type, fluids, etc., etc. And the only way we can just leverage this data is obviously by having a large volume of jobs and understanding what are the successful techniques in each scenario, right? So I would say this is work in progress. We're learning as we speak, but absolutely having the right domain expertise and having the right conversation, instead of talking about what is the cheapest coiled tubing company that is going to give me this, how we can absolutely understand what is the main challenge and how, by using techniques that probably have been done in other, other region, how we can absolutely bring a new workflow that is going to unlock the production, and more importantly, how we can be ready for any contingency, right? So digital is very broad, and as I said before, on the drilling side and subsurface, we have fantastic simulation engines, very digital collaborative environments, and in the intervention and production, this is a huge wide space. We're absolutely working very hard on that, and we're going to be disrupting the market with some very innovative solutions that will address part of these challenges that we have described.
Thanks, William, and thanks, Matthew. You both make very, very strong arguments for why we should be focused on proactive intervention. So, and William, you mentioned there digital solutions and the way ahead there. So it really brings me on to my last question. What kind of technology innovations do you think can improve well interventions even further?
So I think, Nils, the intervention space is very broad, right? There is so many things, and so many customers are asking, for solutions on the P&A, on life extension, how we can just do more on the stimulation space. I think when people talk about intervention, they're thinking about retrieving a fish from a well, but the reality is that we are really just scratching the surface, right? I think by leveraging the stimulation, we can bring a lot of value and a lot of extra barrels that in the past perhaps we were not really doing that. So now we're very connected with the stimulation. So within our portfolio, we have a stimulation as part of our same division. And I would say stimulation techniques are going to be, I would say, one of the key priorities. As I mentioned before, P&A and subsea intervention is also a hot topic. I would say this is one of the areas where we are going to see a lot of technology improvements. And also on the rigless intervention, anything that brings a new technique that allows us to remove the rig. This is good because you can reduce costs, you can reduce your carbon footprint, and you can bring barrels offline. So I would say this is where the technology has been focused in the industry, and where we at Schlumberger we're also being quite focusing in our investments as well.
Yes, just to complement and to be very brief, just being wary on time, I think one of the key things we can bring to the industry, and that's what we're working on, and William alluded to with regard to some of the digital solutions, is making the workflow for intervention as a whole much more easy to access. As I said, some of these workflows are not standard workflows when we look at the way that they've been done in the past with regards to the OPEX versus the CAPEX focus. So that's what we're trying to do, so that the full array of intervention technologies can be a lot more easy to pick, to have robust outcomes. If you've got those robust outcomes, if we can use the tools to get rid of that 35% inefficiency we saw earlier, it just makes the case all the more compelling. So I think that's going to be one of our biggest focuses moving forwards, to ensure that clients in a collaborative environment plan these interventions in a quick, efficient manner, and that we can go and execute using some of the autonomous solutions that William, and then within the digital environment, learn from that, so that return of experience is captured to optimize future operations.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, William. Fantastic discussion on proactive interventions, very compelling arguments. So just quickly, to finish this off, key takeaways for the audience. I mean, a great discussion, so key takeaways.
Okay, if I can give, I would say, a statement that I want people to remember. We can say that intervention is, I would say, stuck in time. We are still working the same way we were working 20, 30 years ago, and that's our ambition, to be able to disrupt and innovate the intervention space. And I think improving the success rate of the interventions, and I'm talking about how many barrels additional we can bring, this is, I would say, the key mindset shift that we want to achieve across the industry.
Thanks, William. Matthew?
Just to absolutely echo what William said, and I think, it's an exciting time to be involved in interventions. I think the business environment is right for it. I think there's innovation, and I think there's a massive opportunity for us, as we've discussed, with regards to what we can do on the digital side. So a very exciting times ahead for us.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with the pair of you more. It is a very exciting time to be in industry and in interventions. So thank you very much, William and Matthew. It's been a great discussion with you both today, so thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. You've been amazing with all your comments and questions there as well, so thank you for that. So really just to wrap us up here, we have one more tech talk tomorrow to come with Schlumberger, where we'll be talking about transforming stimulation through intervention. So it really follows on from Matthew's and William's conversation today about proactive intervention. So make sure you catch that tomorrow. And really look forward to the ICoTA SPE conference next week. A lot of great conversation and discussion coming up in that, so please check that out. And just leaves me to say thank you very much to everybody here, to you, the audience, to Schlumberger and SPE Foundation for making this possible, this SPE Live, and to Ash, our producer, for doing all the magic behind the work, behind the screen. So thank you, and see you all soon. Thanks again. Bye. Have a great day.